And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@ipropertyradio.com. I'm now joined by Paul Mitchell, Director at Mitchell McDermott, Project Managers and Quantity Surveyors. Paul, thank you for being with us again today. It's been a while since we saw you last in studio.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, Carol. How are you?
Good, thank you, Paul. The world has changed a lot since we sat down in a studio together. First of all, just I suppose a really important one. Most people listening in will be very familiar with Mitchell McDermott's latest report that issued. In fact, I remarked to you off air that certainly it's been a while since an industry report has garnered so much media attention, and there was a lot in it. So we might just break that down. But before we get into the report, you might just share an overview of how construction activity is faring.
Yeah, I suppose, last March and through April into May, we had our first construction shutdown, which was extremely difficult. It was the first time that sites had shut down, construction had to reorganise itself. And I think the contractors and the CIF did a very good job of working out their standard operating procedures, bringing health and safety onto sites and dealing really well with it. It was very difficult in terms of construction claims, productivity, missed deadlines, kind of legal damages and that front. And to be honest, we were only getting towards the end of those negotiations, which are tense for all because everybody has lost money. And then obviously construction didn't get shut down in the second national lockdown. And we were surprised to an extent, albeit everyone was surprised about the increase in cases, to get locked down again. And I think you can see now that there's extreme frustration with the length of time that this has gone on. And the fact that the minister with the Taoiseach actually on the 31st of January said when cases drop below 1,000, construction would reopen. That was the first and last time we heard that. And construction didn't reopen. And now what people are finding is with part of the industry, a third of the industry or so open, major projects, Grange Gorman's open, healthcare projects, exporters, manufacturing, and essential, they're all deemed essential projects. Social housing falls under the same banner. The dichotomy for contractors is that they have to pay their people to hold on to them. So the contractors that have contracts managers and programmers and all these people, if they don't pay them fully, they will leave to a contractor potentially that has an open site. Because people are still scarce. And then we've had a lot of people not come back from mainland European countries due to the lockdown. So I think just in the last week, I think the patience is wearing really thin, and the lack of engagement with the construction industry is giving rise to great frustration because people are saying, well, there haven't been that many outbreaks. People have been separated. We're talking about 60,000 people when I think today we've had 320,000 children return to school as part of the first phase, and all of the people that will be, traveling with those children to school. And they're saying, for the sake of the 60,000, is it really going to have an effect? Because the history to date has been that there haven't been that many cases on sites, and that they have been well behaved, and they pumped all this money in and all this training, and you had to do a separate test and you had to have a card and so on to get to site. And that's all been seen as kind of not a waste, but there's been a lack of recognition for the amount of effort put in, I think. So I think frustration is definitely bubbling over right as we speak.
Yeah, Paul, I would absolutely second that from our own clients and the people we're speaking to. But in what you've mentioned there's a couple of things to unpack because absolutely this figure, this hope that we got that construction sites would reopen when cases got below 1,000. And within a week of that being said, I think cases got one day to 830 and then the next day was over 1,000. And there didn't seem to be any clarity, no shining light to actually show what was likely to happen. So I agree in terms of frustration. And actually, I think the Construction Industry Federation and other industry lobby groups have actually done a really good job in speaking out, in, maybe calling out some of the less logical alliances. So, for example, it's confusing to me why construction and schools were lumped in together over the past few months. So as in, if schools were being shut down, construction sites would be shut down. And I didn't understand that. But, and actually, I genuinely didn't think it was helpful. So to see the schools go back and construction sites not go back, that just seems like the reverse order in terms of safety and the people we need to be protecting. And, look, I certainly have not been critical about any of the public health aspects here, because I think it's an incredibly challenging job. I wouldn't like to be in the position of any of our leaders over the past year or in the coming year, so I think that they've done a tremendous job. And certainly it wouldn't be my place to question public health decisions. But I cannot reconcile how schools going back, teachers not vaccinated, would be a safer environment than construction sites when they have shown to be a lower degree of infection. Yeah. It just doesn't seem logical.
Yeah, it's the numbers really, because you talk about the number of children. My own daughter went back to school today, but you talk about the number of people. And then, an article in the paper at the weekend talked about, the fact that you've got the builders, if you want, sitting at home. Well, they're not the type of people to sit at home either. And therefore, are you just giving rise to the potential for kind of workers to be out doing jobs in other people's houses? And are these people on the move anyway? And I think it's not good from just a national point of view. I think we have to keep in mind the infection, and we have to keep in mind the numbers and the seriousness of it. But that's not lost on people, and hence all the effort and so on. But then no other construction industry is shut down. So then outside people, and we rely a lot on foreign direct investment and investment here to produce housing. We've talked a lot about that over the last few weeks. But if they're saying, well, they don't care about the construction industry, or, we'll say one thing and then we just won't communicate with you for a few weeks and hopefully you'll have forgotten about it. Like, people are sitting at home and they're being funded by contractors. We know that it's a very tight industry with small subcontractors, and it's just a patchwork quilt of small subcontractors. But for no information or no communication to have happened, I think that's the very frustrating thing. And we can understand effort and we can understand everything, but I think the mixed messages and the lack of attention given to it, or the balance, I think that's probably what's missing, is that balance. And with the schools, 320,000 plus travellers, or drivers, people bringing the children to school maybe, or the buses, or just, there is that anyway. To say then that the 60,000 people that play a critical role in delivering housing have to sit at home. It is hard for people who are footing a bill every day to watch that and to have no communication on the issue. So I think, again, the frustration is there.
Yeah. Paul, the last day we spoke with you, we had touched on, and you touched on it in the opening moments of this interview about construction claims. And really, the last time we spoke, it was much too early to say how matters like that would resolve themselves. And I assume that for a lot of sites, it's still too early to say. But I mean, in terms of what you're seeing at the moment, how is that working out? Because I think you very rightly pointed out, everybody's lost money here.
I think for a lot of cases, I would say 80 or 90% of the cases, the claims have been agreed, or a way forward has been agreed. New contracts have been approached in a different way that anticipate pandemic clauses, liquidated amounts for if the site stops again, what if we have a new variant or some other pandemic. So that's very firmly written into construction contracts, and that risk is now identified. So I think contractors and clients alike saw that, look, we have to work our way through this. There is no point in anybody standing in ceremony because projects have to get done. And we had a lot of student projects that had to be completed, hotels that, were on track to open and so on. And a lot of those projects did get to their finish line, and claims are there. We also have a plethora of other projects where we've agreed the claim situation and the contract situation, which was very, very difficult. And now we're back to doing exactly the same thing, but this time round, there's no money left in the kitty. A lot of these projects were wrung dry from the first negotiation. Nobody anticipated having to pay this money. The revenue is down or delayed, and the contractors have also, everybody's had cost. And I think that's going to be the very difficult piece about this. And I think it's going to take a lot longer to sort out. I think it's going to, like, the pricing from contractors in the marketplace is definitely going to be in flux, because there's supply-demand imbalances in lots of different areas. We've had student and hotel projects slow. We've got, let's say, uncertainty about the office market. We've got data centers and flying ahead, and residential that there's still, a demand for. We've got funds that still want to put their money into Irish construction projects. But then if we go below the surface, we'll then see that between Brexit and COVID, we've had this disruption to all the supply chains. So we've got this, tariffs and price increases, which caught a lot of people by surprise. You wouldn't think it, but a lot of subcontractors were surprised or didn't understand that if they were getting a product from mainland Europe and it was repackaged or badged, or there was something done to it in the UK before it came here, that suddenly you had a tariff applied. So then everyone's kind of trying to grapple with getting around the UK land bridge, getting things direct, and in some cases actually having your site shut wasn't a bad thing from that point of view, as people tried to figure that out. But there's been a range of things, like transport costs gone up 300%. I couldn't understand this for the first. I said, why have transport gone up so much? And because the containers ended up in the wrong continent, and certain shipping lines were open, but other shipping lines were closed. Containers ended up in the wrong continent and ended up in a supply-demand imbalance. And then you read another headline and it says timber has gone up 10%. Okay, why is timber gone up 10%? Because Ireland have fallen behind on their licenses for felling in forests. And you kind of go, okay, so that's a completely different thing. And then you see companies like, it's already public knowledge from the company, but Kingspan say we can't support certain contracts because our input prices have gone up 65% for certain metal, because of the way China now procure and manufacture steel. And you kind of go, there's a lot of different challenges going on at the one time when you really want things to just be settled.
Yeah.
So
but I suppose then I'm thinking of contractors who are sitting here that have tender bids in front of them and deadlines looming. How is all of these different factors, how is that going to change contracts going forward? What is the advice that you're giving, say, to contractors right now?
Well, I suppose we're always across the table from contractors because we just act for clients. So we said to the contractors, give us your best price, please. Apart from being glib about it, I think the impact of this is just a lot of uncertainty. And I think it's very, very difficult for contractors who want work, who need work, where there's, the pipeline has been, that tap has been really slowed. So when the contractors come back and they're finishing their projects that are on site, but they really want to get new work. But when we've got all this uncertainty around, it's very difficult for them, because in contracts, they buy out that inflation. And they buy out that inflation for the next 12 or 18 or 24 months, depending on how long the contract is. But they then have to go back to back and sell that risk down to their subcontractors and so on. So it's really the kind of smaller subcontractors. And that's why I think we have to watch the market quite carefully as we reopen as to what happens with the supply chain. Because ultimately, it's the person at the end of the queue that is really kind of saddled with a lot of the risk. And when they can't handle the risk, there is the potential for them to fall over. Now, we're not seeing that, but the more the industry stays closed and have to deal with risk on both sides of the fence, it has to be a case that, there will be repercussions from that over the next few months.
Yeah, you're painting quite an alarming picture there, Paul. There are so many negative factors in play here. And, I suppose to jump back to the report that I mentioned there at the start, and I recommend that the report makes for interesting reading. So I absolutely recommend people go to your website and get the details from there, Mitchell McDermott. You touched on some of the sectors that are faring well in terms of data centers. And I mean, some of the stats around hotel rooms would have surprised people. But I think one of the big shock stories that came out of your report was around the residential side of things and the number of units that have been delayed or are currently delayed as a result of judicial reviews. The process to the SHD process has really been derailed. Can you maybe briefly share what's been happening in that sector?
Yeah, so I suppose we carried out an analysis on this so-called fast track planning, which is the strategic housing development, and that was been in play for about 3.5 years, and that's granted permission for 65,000 units over that time. Now, on board Planola, so this is where you consult with the local authority and then you get permission to go straight to on board Planola. And there's been some controversy around that in terms of people's right to object. But it was due to the amount of objections they were getting in delaying schemes that was taken up to 100 weeks to get planning. As opposed to what's meant to be 40 weeks under the SHD or fast track. But even going down the fast track route on board Planola, we're refusing 1 in every 5 permissions. Okay, and that's the board doing its job, that buildings and design that aren't up to scratch get refused. I certainly have no issue with that. But in 2020, after that 1 in 5, 20%, 30% of the 2020 planning permissions are either quashed or stalled due to this so-called judicial review process. And, if you go back maybe 5 years ago and you ask someone what JR was or judicial review, they'd say, I think it's something to do with the courts, but, you wouldn't have related it to planning. But I think what people have found is that, well, I'm not happy with on board Planola, so I'm going to take a legal review and I'm going to go to the courts and basically go to the courts and say, I think that on board Planola have erred in their permission. And that's a very legal procedure. And I think what we found was that some permissions had been quashed by the board because of sometimes relatively minor issues. So there might have been the wrong draft of a report included, incorrect references, not enough dimensions on a drawing. Now, and in some of those cases, you take it, the permission gets quashed, snakes and ladders right down to the bottom of the board again. And it takes 4 months to climb up that ladder if you don't have to change anything. So you change the date on the report, you correct the reference, or you add the dimensions, you climb back up your ladder again, and then you submit the planning and they go, yes, you have permission. So all that is delay and cost, right? Now, we're not taken away at all from the fact that if there is something material, someone has missed an environmental issue, or there is some particular thing there, then fine, okay, if the board have made a mistake. it's really the frivolous nature of the JR process, and it's really an abusive process, really, and it's a very low bar in order to go to court. So what we said there was that, you know, there should be a review, and I understand that the Minister for Housing is actually looking at this in terms of carrying out a review to say, well, you know, is the process too easy to take? Is it too easy to abuse? The process should still be open for everybody. Cost shouldn't be used as a barrier, because it should be just about the facts of the matter themselves. But when we did the analysis, to be honest, it shocked us because we were hearing about it more and more. And even in our projects now, on the residential projects, so Mitchell McDermott are involved in 14,000 units today, apartments, that is, not housing, housing in addition to that. And in the projects where we're project managers, we have to now include an 8-week period after we get planning permission where we all sit and do nothing. And we wait until there has been no objection or no judicial review taken, and then we move on. So you've kind of got that 8 weeks introduced for all projects now, where you can't get your contractor going, or you can't enter into detailed design or your contract stage. And you have to sit and wait. And then if you do get judicial review and your permission is quashed, that's a minimum of 4 months. But it's probably, if there's any element of redesign to be done, it's a minimum of 6 months. And then if it is anything more than that, then obviously it's that time is on top of that again. So
do we, sorry to cut across there, Paul, but do we know, in terms of, you know, you're detailing huge delays, you know, we can almost make assumptions about the huge cost that would go along with that, not just the cost of delay, but also the cost of redoing the application. You know, do we have an idea of the line whereby these costs and delays push a project into the territory where it's just no longer viable?
But we've just, wearing my other hat, we've just issued the Society of Chartered Surveyors report on apartments, where we look at exactly that viability issues on apartments. And we know that we still have issues with viability on build to sell schemes for apartments, let's say. And the only people that are getting us out of jail are people that are taking a long-term view on apartments, like pension funds and so on, that are buying them. And we still see that those metrics are very narrow in terms of making a scheme work. And if you take an example here of 100 units, and if you take the holding costs for the site for a year, let's just say, it is anywhere, you know, in the order of $500,000 for a scheme of 100 units, right? So that's $5,000 per unit if you were delayed for a year, plus your redesign costs, you know, for your team, plus legal fees, etc., etc. So all this is doing is delaying a scheme which has been granted planning, adding cost to it. And in that situation, that cost is getting added on to the ultimate punter who's trying to rent or trying to buy a unit. So this process that's happening is only affecting the people. Like, affordability is still our biggest issue in residential accommodation. And a lot of people, a lot of parties, a lot of opposition parties talking about affordability, but at the same time, you know, saying that JR process, there's nothing wrong with that because it's stopping big bad developers delivering us homes.
It's very frustrating, Paul. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that actually I could talk to you about all day. And I would love to talk to you about it all day, but I don't think that we'd even get close to solving the issue. But it's definitely something that we've touched on before. We're likely to return to. But in the meantime, that report has put a lot of things in very sharp context for not just for us, but as you say, for you know, for hopefully policymakers as well. So it would be good to see some change coming out of that. For now, that's all we've time for. Thank you so much for being with us today. That was Paul Mitchell, Director at Mitchell McDermott, Project Managers and Quantity Surveyors. We need to take another quick break. Stay tuned.